Well, good morning, everybody. All right, here's where I'm going to take you through this video today. We're going to talk about some new evidence that we've now seen at the end of May and beginning of June that needs to be used to kind of correct where we think this upcoming summer is going to go. So at the very end of this, I will have long-range forecast weather information coming to you. We're going to just adjust some of our risk parameters on where we think it's going to be wet versus where it's going to be dry and hot versus cold. So we're going to get into that in a few moments. We're going to talk about the latest changes in the drought monitor, certain crops that are in drought and what that might mean. And I want to talk more about the severe weather as it continues to move forward. And then the risk of getting ourselves into a pattern where we see a lot of what are called ridge riders. They tend to be more linear in their structure in terms of storm type. And that tends to produce a lot of straight line wind issues. So we'll get into that in a few moments. But you've been looking at a map looking at the last few weeks here of precipitation as ranks. I love these maps. But this is what they tell us, all right? Now, we analyzed this multiple times over the last couple of weeks, and what we were talking about was how the jet stream went way up into Canada into a larger ridge that then came over parts of the northeast United States, and that flow had risk factors to it earlier in the season to produce rather widespread drought issues here, but it didn't. And one of the main reasons for that was, while it kept the west so very dry, as you can see here, we saw these lows that kind of snuck under this. Some of them came out of the Pacific. Many of them just formed coming out of the Four Corner states, and they moved very slowly. Some of them took this trajectory. Some came across like it didn't matter. There was low pressure in this area, and that was poorly forecast by me back when I was making these predictions for the month of May, way back in February and March. I really thought that larger ridge was going to just be the dominant factor. Now, that larger ridge did cause all of those Canadian wildfires, and many of you are still dealing with the smoke from those wildfires, but that's how close this pattern was to not being exceptionally wet here, but instead being very hot and very dry early in the season. Okay, now with all that being said, I'm curious, I really wanted to know, historically, have we ever seen a May pattern like this? Like that looks just like this. So I'm going to link this for you so you can go play around with it. But what I did was I went to, this is a great site. Here it's from the University of Maine, and it allows you to reconstruct temperature and precipitation patterns using different data sets. In this case, I'm going to use the ERA 5 data set, which is from the European model. And I've just selected the month of May. And I'm like, well, let's just go back in time and look for Mays that are similar. Now, that was May of 2019. Again, exceptionally wet here, but this wasn't how this May shaped out, right? I mean, we were wet down here too, and California wasn't wet. So you see that's not a good analog if you're just looking at precipitation patterns. I kept going back and I landed on 15. And again, 15 was super wet down here, a little drier along the coast, which is more consistent. But we've actually had a pocket that's been drier in here that needs to continue to get our consideration. And we were very wet this May up the coast. So no, 15 is not an analog. I just kept sliding through these. I don't see any of them that look anything like this particular year. When you just look at the whole spatial pattern of precipitation across the United States. And I just as a reminder, 1993 was a massive flood year for the central United States. This was a Mississippi flood year, a big one. And as I talked about multiple times, patterns can change over very short amounts of time. So when we start to make a pivotal shift in the risk factors, it does not take risk off the table. Let me give you a case in point. This was May of 1993. If I were just to jump up to June of 1993, and then we go to July of 1993, I mean, look at this. And then you get into August, still extremely wet here. And by September, it slides to Missouri. These kind of things where you have these precipitation extremes that vary on subseasonal timescales, they can happen anytime. But my point was, I can't find a May that has the same look as the current May does right now. And I think that's going to be just important as we go back. So I want you to do this. Just go look at yourself and you try to find one that you think matches this pattern the best. I looked and I spent way too much time looking and I can't find it. Same thing with the temperatures. Now, we've had cooler Mays, but if you just have a look at this, from the end of May through the beginning of June, we've had a large area here that's seen more cooler air than hot. Now, there's some heat coming into this, but I've got questions on the longevity of that heat. And I know that parts of the eastern Great Lakes and eastern Corn Belt into the Northeast have been extremely delayed because of the cold here. And it's been so good to see these larger storms getting into Florida, which has been so hot and very dry in pockets. All right. So with all that as kind of a setup as to where we're going to take this, this is where today's max temperatures look like. This is what they look like. We're still cool here. compared to our averages. Extremely hot in the Columbia Basin. We talked a lot about this last week. You can now see 103 degrees in Yakima, 95 around Spokane. These are very, very hot temperatures for the West. But as we alluded to last week, we knew this ridge was going to try to move its way across the country. And on Friday, now this was from Friday, okay, the NOAA and the National Weather Service put out this risk area for Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa for moderate heat risk, 615 to 617. And this is when this ridge was expected to open, and every model at the end of last week tried to make this kind of I-80 corridor very dry, okay? Now, we are always going to question that, given where the moisture has been this spring. All this moisture to the south of that area means we're not far away from a source, and there's nothing blocking. If this was dry, then we would really get concerned about hot and dry conditions in this area. This is a very critical region to be watching here. Now, with that, I want to show you what's changed. This is the newest ECMWF, and I'm just going to take you out there to the 14th. And again, this was the area forecast to be hot. What was the dates again? Sorry. The 15th through the 17th. So now the new forecast in the models, okay, this would be the high temperatures on the 15th. Nope. We get into the 16th. There we are. And we get into the 17th. And they're gonna make an adjustment to their forecast today when they do it. And if you start to look, you see these interesting features in through here in the kind of in the colors. That is how the model is handling its own production of convection. And we're seeing a lot of the heat back down in the southwest, southern plains. Well, really, New Mexico to El Paso. Very, very hot here. So even over the weekend, we watched yet another massive adjustment in this prediction. And it highlights just how challenging of a time period this particular part of the year is. And here's what was the most challenging. If you watched this last week, we saw the models get stuck. Remember we were talking about in long waves. And that trough just did not move. It was just in the model and stayed off the northwest coast. We'll take a look now as we move forward. This is starting next Monday. Watch that trough right there. As we go forward, that trough begins to slide right in through here. And by day 10, I mean, it's here in the northern plains. And this is what's critical about this. There's a ridge ahead of it, and that ridge is going to be here leading up to where this trough comes in. We talk so much about these ridge-riding storms, and what often happens is there's some sort of trough event that sneaks into the west that initiates a ridge-riding event. In other words, you're getting the lift that just builds into plenty of moisture from the Gulf and the moisture that's coming from parts of the mid-south, the southeast, the southern plains, and it's just going to build, and we're likely going to see storms result from this. And that's what's changed over the weekend. That's a pretty sizable change overall. So let's compare them. This is the new 10-day European model. And if you looked at this at all last week, or even over the weekend, several runs opened up a sizable hole right here. And now some of the new runs from the ECMWF, as you can see, and the new GFS have tried to fill that in with some sort of thunderstorm activity. Now, what are we not seeing? I think that's what's important about looking at this. If we were getting ourselves into a pattern where these thunderstorms would not exist, you would be seeing, large areas like this up in the Canadian prairie, much more expansive across the midsection of the country. You'd see better storm action in the northwest and in the northeast or southeast instead of the pattern looking just wet for a lot of folks. And you're going, whoa, what's going to happen to me in here or me in here or up here? I wouldn't even settle on it just yet. I honestly watched the models bounce around me. If you looked at some of the weekend runs, this area was soaked. And it was Iowa that was bone dry, so just to be clear on this. Now, model-to-model forecasting is going to be a mess. So take a look. Let's go to southern Minnesota right here. This is the European model's 10-day forecast. Ready? Watch southern Minnesota. There's the GFS. One model is bringing in an excess of 2 to 3 inches. The other one is bringing in a deficit of 2 inches. So we need to just understand that that's what's going to happen with these models. They're not going to be able to do that kind of prediction very well at all. Now, thinking about where we've been this past weekend, we did watch on the 7th severe storms just rip off across northern Alabama, getting into parts of Georgia all the way over to South Carolina. This whole region, Mississippi to South Carolina, numerous reports of severe wind damage. And then we watched the storms start on the 7th back here into this section of the southern plains, which is where yesterday we had major concerns. Now, we did have 347 reports, including 6 tornadoes. But if you just look into this area, a lot of hail, a lot of wind. But what it didn't do, which was what was feared, was get organized into a great big long squall line that was going to rip across this part of the Red River Valley. Now later it did. We did see in the overnight hours a squall line that moved into eastern Texas. But I got to show you something on satellite. Here's the frontal boundary. Now this is yesterday on Sunday that the day before produced all of the severe weather here. Watch the deep low that's in parts of the northern plains, upper Midwest, just sit there and spin. And it's the confluence of two fronts, one here and one here, plus the position of the dry line, which has been so far back to the west. This just set this whole region up for, multiple sources of lift in the atmosphere, while Canadian wildfire smoke worked its way on the backside of this deeper low that was moving, through parts of Minnesota. We also saw some broader convection across the mountains here. This is not monsoonal in nature. This is just, surging on the heat of the day on top of some of these mountains back in parts of Nevada and California. But let's get those drawings off there just to show you how this looked right at sunset. And some of these storms were very large. And in the overnight hours, they did kind of coalesce into a line that moved through parts of eastern Texas. I'll show you more about that in a second. But I want to take a look back at the weekend precipitation totals. And I'm just looking at this pattern across the country. That's a lot. That's a lot of thunderstorm activity for a lot of people. Now, there are holes, no doubt about it. But that's a lot of moisture, given that there was such concern. And that concern came from me over where there could have been some problems in late May and early June. Now, one area that was really interesting to forecast over the weekend was right here. The Storm Prediction Center put out a moderate risk for this region. And the development of those storms just went around it. And that is just something, I hate to say it this way, but that's just something that happens once these storms get developing. But this is what they look like. Just kind of a quick glance here back going into last night. There's the line. Look at this squall line come right through here. We're going to see more probably damage reports later this morning as more folks are getting up and seeing what happened overnight. But there it is. That's our pattern we're in. And that upper level low is still sitting and spinning over parts of the Great Lakes. And it's going to move slowly. That's been the issue. They've been so slow to move east. And that one's going to take its dear sweet time. All right, so let's start to build an idea about where this is going to go. The top thing, honestly, for me that I'm going to be watching this week is the development of this. And I'm going to give you the timing on it. Now, the reason I'm talking about that so much is because we've had concerns, since winter, that we weren't going to be able to get ourselves into a northwest flow setup to bring in fronts, to bring in the little waves that wiggle around the broader ridge to give us development of these storms. This is totally expected, right? Just given how wet we've been, there's plenty of moisture to recycle. But the question is going to be, what do these storms look like? How far back into the Canadian prairie do they go? And how much heat starts in the west and moves east? Now, I'm just going to draw a little line in the sand here. If these thunderstorms, which we've now seen in all the models, I know the GFS was bone dry here, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It's still making storms. If the models are wrong, and this does not happen, we do not end up getting these storms, or these precipitation totals are 2 times too high, okay, then we have to start having a broader discussion about where flash drought could be in early summer. Now, you know that I've made a case for how, even though it's not highly probable, there is the risk of having a major pattern change here at some point in the next, 45 to 60 days. Now, this has been our area that's been absolutely soaked. We know that the atmosphere has that tendency in that area. But the question is going to be ahead of that. How do these summer thunderstorms get through some of our drier areas? And that's what brings us to this drought monitor discussion. Now, if you remember, back at the end of fall, we were talking about 80 to almost 90% of the lower 48 in some form of drought, right? I think it peaked out somewhere in the 80s. So that's, if you just see the abnormally dry color, this color here, all the way to D4 drought. Now, that has been significantly reduced since, okay? But the drought monitor still shows us. There's a part of the I-80 corridor here that's got dryness. We can see much of the western high northern plains, this region through here. We still have the southwest, very dry. Florida's been dipping in and out of drought. We've watched drought get cleared out of parts of the southeast only to return in pockets. And we're now getting into that summer time period where nearly everything is going to be dominated by convection, storms, okay? So I was thinking this through, and I just wanted to throw out some stats because, my goodness, if you kind of look at how much rain is expected to fall I mean, this is the majority of our cotton belt is here. Now, we grow cotton in Arizona and California as well, but I mean, if we look at the majority of it there, and so I was just looking at the row crops in drought, and right now I've only got 6% of the cotton belt according to the National Weather Service and the map, the U.S. Drought Monitor folks out of University of Nebraska Lincoln. It's 6% corn, 21% barley. I mean, you can see the numbers here. Soybeans at 16%, and so we're just trying to assess who is the most vulnerable going forward in this particular pattern. All right, so this is the story. Why are the models different? Like I picked out Minnesota as an example. They both have this deep trough moving through there, and then they initiate a wave. See it in the GFS here. Here it is in the the European, and then you have this feature coming through Northern California we got to keep an eye on. As we play this forward, these two waves, the one from California made itself there. The wave that was here snuck into this area, so we're going to talk about those areas and their storm threats in a few moments. But here we are, this is Thursday, getting into Friday and Saturday. Now what's going to be very interesting is as this ridge opens up, can you see it? I mean, there it is in the GFS, there it is in the European model. Okay, as that ridge opens up, does anything come through to squash it? By Sunday, we already start to see in the European model, see these little short waves, those little ribbons of vorticity? Those are the things that tend to generate, at some point in summer, ridge-riding thunderstorms. Now, we're going to talk about if those do in a few moments. Then we get out here to Monday. Now, watch what the GFS does versus the European. It has already tossed through another broader trough. It's a short wave, but it's still much larger than the little wiggles we saw. European doesn't have it, okay? And what it does with it is it just, look at this, brought this thing over the top. Now it's diving into North Dakota. It's not in the European at all. Now we're way out there in the forecast. We're on 210 hours out. But these little differences are why when you look at the 10-day forecast, they look entirely different. And so what will be critical to see here is where do these things go when we get out there to day 10? If they do not show up, okay, this whole region has much greater risk. In fact, I could probably draw that a little bit larger, has risk of being drier. If they do show up, it's going to storm like mad. Okay, so speaking of storms, 3 maps across the top of the Storm Prediction Center's outlook today. This is Tuesday and Wednesday. But still the pattern is there to keep exciting these storms. In terms of very wet weather, today we're going to line this corridor here where that frontal boundary currently sits. You saw the dry Canadian air and smoke coming in. Then you've got this area tomorrow, and then you start looking at a bit of a reset by day 3. Storms this morning, currently down in parts of the southeast. They're off the southeast coast. There's the tail end of the front from the squall line they went through. And overall, I think the model had a pretty good initialization. As of 7 a.m. here, this is what we've got. And let's just play this forward to watch the low curl up into the Great Lakes. We do need to be on the lookout for bands of storms through parts of the eastern Corn Belt, wet into parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, northern Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. Watch late in the day the storms fire up throughout the west. So this is where the heat is. These storms are going to pop in this area. And then we work our way into the overnight hours, into early Tuesday morning. That front clears. We're going to watch Texas for the risk of stronger storms. And then we start to see this whole thing do a reset where the ridge begins to build in by the time we get out there to Wednesday. Flipping over to our comparison of the GFS and the European model. Now, this is where we're going to see a lot of differences after the next few days. So that's through Tuesday into Wednesday. Okay. We go from Wednesday to Thursday. Can you see at the front just lingering here, increasing those chances of showers? Wednesday into Thursday. Now look, see this? See that little frontal boundary stuck in through there? Both models are trying to squeeze out some rain on this, including all the way back to Montana. Watch that one while storms are still in Texas. Good agreement through 84 hours. We go out there beyond that. This is Thursday into Friday. And Friday into Saturday. Now look at that. That is Saturday evening. Widespread storms through this large, what's called a southeastern quadrant of the United States, both models. But into Sunday, this is when we're starting to watch these little ribbons of vorticity. See, there goes one. We talked about that one a minute ago. But watch the difference as we get out here into next week. That's Monday into Tuesday. The models really start to split on this. Now, if you're curious where you can get this yourself, just go to agweather.com, slide down here just a little bit, and you'll see it. There they are, stacked up. You can go compare these two models anytime you want. It's right there for you. But as I think this through, I'm going to just look a little farther down on my website at the 7-day precip totals. And you start to notice something. I got the European, the AI, the GFS, the WPC, and then the NBM. They're all trying to cut a wedge into this. See that? The size of that wedge by the end of the next 7 days, what it really looks like is going to be critical to telling us if the atmosphere is capable of storming. You can maybe see a little bit better when we look at the 10-day chance of staying under a ½ inch. This is this wedge I'm talking about right there. If that fills in, and this is wrong, then we really have to start to change our narrative on where drought risk is going to be in spring. Now, you know that this Climate Prediction Center has drought developing in this area. We've seen the long-range models, they have drought developing in that area. My preseason forecast had drought developing in that area. I'm trying to make a pivot, and I'm going to make a lot of that pivot on what happens in the next 10 days right here. Now, looking this over, take note, we are drier actually in the Gulf. We're drier here off the southeast coast. And there had been some concern. You remember we talked about this, 10 days ago, that the GFS was generating hurricanes in this area. And we were talking about those being phantom storms. And sure enough, they are. Most of our tropical cyclone activity is off in the East Pacific, where we have 2 new named systems here. Now, just to be clear, we're going to get into naming a lot of these tropical systems going forward. There are pronunciation guides. And if you look at them again, here they are. Their names, second and third one on here, are Barbara and Cosme, right? If I just say it this way. So we have to be careful. This is not Barbara, okay? Like the Beach Boys may have sung, but Barbara. No, maybe they said Barbara. I can't remember. It's a great song. But anyway, two systems, and they're currently forecast to kind of just linger. Okay, there's the first one, and here's Barbara. Just tropical storm, maybe getting up to hurricane status, but not doing like Alvin did, which was to bring that moisture farther to the north. And we can see that when we look at the tropical cyclone trajectories based off the European ensemble. So if you were to see these and they were doing something a bit more like that, then we'd have a story for this part of Mexico getting into the Four Corners states, but they're not. All right, why are they there? There's been this massive shift in the MJO. Big, Matt and I have been discussing it as a convectively coupled Kelvin wave. It moved over here fast. And over the next 5 days, the lid is off here. It is on here and here. That's where there's suppression in the atmosphere. Now watch this. When we mentioned it was fast, that's the next 5 days. Here's day 5 through 10, already back. And that shift back, this rapid change in the models, taking all of the rising motion back to Indonesia, Northern Australia, is going to really just mess with the MJO forecast, because it popped way out into phase 7, expected to collapse and maybe come back over to phase 4 and 5. Now look at this. If you're in phase 7 and it is this point in June, see it here, June 10th, if you looked at just a direct correlation with no major lag in this, we don't see a dominant pressure pattern across North America as an example. Maybe favors more troughs here. We certainly have one right now, right? You saw that going through. Is there more ridging west? Yeah. Is there a ridge there now? There is. And do you even remember watching? Way back at the beginning of this, we were watching. I'll just take you back there. Take a look. See this over here? Watch. What direction was it moving? It was going that way while the low moved here. There's a whole lot. Where is that page? Sorry, there it is. There's a whole lot about MJO phase 7 that's right now. For example, this and this. Now, if we just collapse, we don't get to experience 8 and 1 and 2. But instead, it just goes to phase 4. What does phase 4 look like? Well, phase 4 puts some sort of ridge there. And you see it? That is northwest flow. That is upper atmosphere northwest flow over a ridge that's from the southwest to Montana, not the south central to Minnesota. And I don't know if you do phase 5, it's still, we just don't, maybe it's 3 and 5, yeah, or 3 and 4. That is, if we come back out, on this diagram, somewhere over here, that is a ridge riding pattern if I ever saw one. So when you look at this, you start looking at those models at that time frame. If it makes that switch by day 10, look at the week 2 forecast. And that's the new European. And it's just like open it up. And we cannot ignore the fact that the model has that look to it, given the MJO correlation. Now, convectively coupled Kelvin waves that move fast, they're very unpredictable, in my opinion. And as a result, they can make for some pretty challenging forecasts. But the temperatures will be a component of this. So as we started off with, here's Monday's highs. Tuesday, look at the heat coming into the plains. But does it last? That's the question. Cool east. There's Wednesday, still hot here. A couple of days in the 90s. June 90s are fine for the crop there. That's Thursday into Friday. We get out there to Saturday and Sunday. This did not last. It's hot, but it's not exceptionally hot in this area. Cooler northeast. So as I think about it, watch these next 5 days compared to day 5 through 10. Last week, what did we see? We saw much more expansive, warmer conditions here. Now we're starting to see day 5 through 10, out there day 10 through 15. I see a much more transient pattern. And now we start to see the chances of troughs of low pressure coming over the ridge and keeping it cooler here and wetter. You just saw that in that week 2 forecast. So how do we wrap all this up? Where's the change in the narrative? The change in the narrative is going to be here. This is the sliding window 7-day forecast anomalies from the European model all the way out through the middle of June. And here we are at the end of June. The middle of July. Here's the end of June, getting into July. And this is what's important. See the ridge expanding? Let's go out to the very end of it. It's right over the 4 corners. So if you have a look at this, that's that fabled 588 line. If the model's right, that is going to make a lot of storms in this corridor. And that is the corridor over which early preseason forecasts had much drier conditions. So here's what we need to understand. If this ridge does not manifest itself here, but is instead there, or if it's more here, which is still a possibility, just very low, then that ridge riding thunderstorm situation is out the door. Now, what is not making sense is that the model attempts to give us the 30-day precip anomaly. It looks like this. And I'm telling you that you will have storms in this corridor and likely an active southwest monsoon starting. And that's going to put the big question mark here. And that's what I see from the European model. Remember last week, the big question to make that all happen is where will the Bermuda high be? Is it going to drift off into the North Atlantic? Because it's not done that yet this year. Some of the worst, hottest, driest years in the midsection of the country, that's what happened. Or is it going to hug the coast and we're going to get a big ridge in the northwest? This is what makes northwest flow happen. Flow from the Gulf, ridge in the west. It all just cascades as it just barrels down into plenty of moisture from the south. Now we can see out there that some of the forecast models like the CFSV2 for the end of June and beginning of July, look right here. Can you see? That's not a shutdown of the Gulf. And all the way to July the 6th, even though there's weaker flow in the Caribbean, there's not a shutdown of the Gulf. So that's why we look out there at these models and see, again, storms. There's not, that's going to be the area that we're going to have to watch most carefully if you're just talking about central U.S. But I do believe we could open up a pretty active corridor here, not just in week 2, but beyond. So that begs the question, is the heat going to go west and stay west? We've always had that question. Most of spring, my narrative was, yeah, the west is going to get hot, but not long duration mega episodes of heat. We just need to see if that's still going to be the narrative as we go forward. So going forward, looking at thunderstorms, this is just another proxy on this. Week 2, we see that corridor opening. Week 3, we see that corridor opening for storms. I know you're going, wow, that's the deepest shade of red they got. I know, but we're just looking at the pattern here. That's the week 2 and week 3 outlook. And then we can't ignore this. One of our best sub-seasonal indicators on where there could be problems with drought versus flood is always going to be soil moisture. So as I look at it, I'm thinking northwest. I'm thinking we got to watch this corridor here. And those being the 2 main spots, maybe some parts of the Canadian prairie that still have drought risk on the table. Why? The subsoil surface moisture is not there. But it's going to take a while to break away from this. So that's the pivot we need to make. All right. To finish this up, I did just go through and label last week some of the things that the new long-range European did for July, August, and September. And again, I did put question marks around, really, are we going to be drier here and drier in the Black Sea? There's a lot of evidence of an active and early Indian monsoon. We have seen already very strong winds coming out here from Africa. across parts of the Indian Ocean into India. So we're going to question that. We've seen the models stay wetter. Manchurian plain, North China plain, very wet throughout Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines. We have to think about the hurricane season because compared to a year ago, this is significantly drier. Yet we've got warm water here. So there's still the risk of these homegrown systems. So overall, we just need to think through what this July, August, September looks like, and then know that over the weekend we did get another model run. Same months, July, August, September, and I see similarities. Let's see the dryness here. I don't know, maybe kind of flip-flopped a bit on the North China plain, Manchurian plain, but India's wet, Indonesia's wet. Kind of this region that's deep in drought down here in Australia is wet. They've got the southeast wetter, which is consistent in all models, but let me show you something as I wrap this up. The new NMME forecast for the central U.S. is now somewhere in neutral. The previous one looked like that. So these differences cannot be ignored. That's the previous run. Let's take you back to the newest one. Most everywhere else around the world looks something similar. It's just North America. So we've now had our conversation about where things need to change as we enter this, are in the middle of this second week of June. And we got critical things to watch going forward. So let's do it together. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.